Cool. Thanks, Christina, for the intro, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, everybody is realizing it's a beautiful day, and I'm sure you're anxious to get out, and so hopefully this will be worth your while. My name is Murtadha. I'm a software engineer at Facebook. Like Christina said, I've been at Facebook for 5 years, actually working on this very project the entire time. But before I keep talking more about this project myself, I want to hear how many people here are developers or engineers? Okay, all right, a lot of the people here. How many people are maybe students or studying to become developers or engineers? Okay, so a few people. Cool. So this is the Internet.org is a project that came out 5 years ago when Facebook was looking at the state of the world and where we're at in terms of connectivity. At the time Facebook had about a billion users, and we're thinking of how do we get to the next billion and the billion after. And I'll share with you some numbers. But before I start talking about this, let's see how many of you guys have drank a little bit of Facebook Kool-Aid and can tell me the mission of Facebook, other than the Facebookers in the room. Anybody? Take a guess if you want. Yeah, what is it? Connect to people in the world. Yeah, that's very close. This is kind of half of it. Yeah. So connecting is kind of the second half of the mission. In fact, it is give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Now, bringing the world closer together involves connecting the world. So I think the mission had previously been make the world more open and connected, and recently was modified to be more about community and bringing people together. And so when we think of the world, we all know what the world looks like from space, but if we take a closer look on our planet, we actually have two worlds. We have the connected world, and that's kind of the world that we live in. If we look at this map here, this shows us the state of connectivity around the world, and it's colored by the different types of connections that people have access to in the different areas. So you see the yellow is the 4G and LTE connectivity, and I think people have LTE here or 4G, right? Yeah, so there is not really a reliable source of connection type for how people access the internet. And the way we've actually built this map is by looking at how people access Facebook. A lot of people on the internet are on Facebook, and so through the Facebook app we can figure out the type of connection that people have, and together we put this map. And it's pretty interesting to look at, you see North America and lots of parts of Europe have the 4G and 3G. 3G is pretty good to use the internet. But then if we look at big parts of Asia and Africa and South America, they either have 2G or nothing. So these big dark spots are places where there's no connectivity. And this is kind of where the premise of this project comes about, and when we start thinking of internet and how to bring to people. So let's look at some numbers. So these are some trends of the population, and showing in contrast to the number of people who have mobile phones or mobile subscribers. So it's projecting that we're going to be at 7.7 billion with 5.5 billion mobile subscribers. And then the next interesting number is how many of these devices are capable of having internet. And it turns out 4.7 billion devices, which is about 85% of them, are capable of connecting to the internet. But it turns out only 2.8 billion people are mobile subscribers. And so there's quite a big gap. So that's about half of the people who are mobile subscribers are on the internet. And this is, again, where we start thinking of the opportunities and the barriers to connectivity that get in the way of people. And so a few also numbers about what does it mean to connect the world and connect people. So Deloitte did this research a few years ago where they looked at the states of the economic status of people and what does it mean for people when they are connected and they have access to technology and the internet. So it turns out that if we're able to connect everybody, this stage is very squeaky. Should I get down? Would that be better? Let's see if this is better. So it turns out that if we connect everybody, then we would be able to lift 160 million people out of poverty. And this is kind of intuitive. You know, having access to the internet brings people a lot of opportunity, and people find jobs and find different ways of learning and improving themselves through access to the internet. Similarly, there would be more than 500 million children who would have access to affordable education. And lastly, every 10% increase in access to internet yields a 4% increase in productivity. And you know, again, these numbers make sense. We here use the internet all the time and rely on it in doing our work. How many of the students in the room can imagine doing homework or an essay or an assignment without accessing the internet? Or how many people here who do their jobs can think of you know, being able to get work done without accessing the internet? And at this point, it's almost unthinkable. In fact, how many people here found out about this event through the internet? Yeah, even I found out about this event through the internet. And so, you know, when we think of the internet, it's no longer a luxury or a thing that you know, is kind of nice to have. It's really an essential thing that we rely on, and so many people don't have access to it. In fact, most of the world doesn't. You know, if we think even, forget about this event, but think about more essential things that we rely on in connecting with people we care about. And you know, people now live in different parts of the world and they stay connected through the different technologies the internet offers. So it really makes a big impact in people's lives. And so this is when we started thinking of what are the barriers to connectivity and why are people not on the internet? So we've been able to identify 3 different barriers and that prevent people from accessing the internet. First barrier is infrastructure. And so when we think of infrastructure, we're talking about internet coverage. So living in areas where there is no internet signal. There's no cellular signal or no Wi-Fi signal that you can use to access the internet. Or that maybe it's actually not fast enough or not reliable enough. So people who live in 2G zones and in populated areas with 2G bandwidth, that's almost as good as not really having the internet. The other barrier is affordability. So you may live in a place where there is internet signal, but it's too expensive. A lot of people are not on it because getting a data subscription or buying a prepaid data card is too much money for them to be able to afford. And this is thinking of, you know, the startup cost of it as well as the ongoing cost of a subscription or filling up a data plan. And lastly, the third barrier is relevance and awareness. And so this is where we think of people who have never heard of the internet. They don't know what a megabyte or a kilobyte is. They're not going to be interested in paying for it or using it. And so, you know, imagine people who live in rural communities. Nobody in their community uses the internet. And for them, it's like, why do I need this? Why is this thing good for me? And so the relevance and awareness remains a big barrier. And so within the projects or the programs of internet.org, we've developed different initiatives to address each one of these barriers. So the infrastructure problem, we have projects and experiments within an entity within Facebook called Connectivity Labs, where we're exploring different solutions to address the infrastructural challenges. And I'll get into more details of those experiments or those projects. And then one of the projects that has kind of come out of, graduated from the Connectivity Labs, if you will, the Connectivity Labs does this futuristic, a little bit science fiction-y stuff with experimenting, like taking big bet project on, and some of them maybe never make it. But the idea is to think a little bit outside the box and try crazy things. Express Wi-Fi is a program that graduated from the Connectivity Labs and now spans to address the problem of infrastructure and affordability. And I'll talk a little bit in details more about that. And then on the side of relevance, we launched a program called Free Basics, which has been successful in running for the last few years, that attempts to address both the affordability and the relevance and awareness problem. And I'll, again, go into the details of that more in a bit. So let's talk about infrastructure. So when we think of infrastructure and think of those big dark parts of the map in Africa, Asia, or South America, you know, the thought or the idea of bringing traditional internet technology to these areas is unthinkable. You know, the way that the internet has been delivered to most of the world and how it gets here today is mostly through fiber. There's some fiber cable that comes somewhere carrying massive internet signal, and then it gets distributed through towers or small routers around the city, and eventually it comes here. And to think about laying down fiber optic cables across Africa, the cost of that would be too prohibitive. The population density in these communities is not enough for any company to be able to invest in this and recover the cost of it. So when we think of infrastructure problem, we're thinking of, again, more innovative and kind of, you know, original ways that have not been attempted, because the traditional means will not solve this problem. So this is when we started thinking of, instead of thinking of things on the ground, let's think of things from space. Or maybe not so much space, but just coming from the top. So this is when we started thinking of Aquila, which is our unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV. And I'll show you a little bit more details about this in a second, but I want to talk about the next phase of this. So we think of these as building blocks to address connectivity problems from the infrastructural perspective. So we have Aquila, something that floats in the air and beams internet. And then the next building block that is used in this scheme is the way that these connections are made, which is free space optics using laser signals to send internet signal either from space down to Earth or among networks within the Earth. And then, which is what this says the millimeter waves are. And then the last component or building block of this is a project that we've been experimenting with called Terragraph, which is, we're thinking of a problem of connectivity within cities. So think of a city like Mumbai, a massive city with high population. The current bandwidth of the internet is not able to support the population there. And so trying to use the internet in a city like that is really challenging. And so Terragraph is a project that is attempting to build this mesh network of routers around the city, where it doesn't require new massive infrastructural installations. So we don't need to put towers on. We simply put a node, something like a little Wi-Fi router. It wouldn't use Wi-Fi, it would use a millimeter wave. And these mesh networks would connect across each other. They would create enough redundancy, because in a city things are constantly getting interrupted. The buzz goes through the signal, there's wind and there's rain and stuff that's always getting in the way. So we create enough redundancy for this network to support the population there. And so we're experimenting with this project actually in San Jose. We've been running a pilot project for over a year now, and these models are proving successful. So let's talk a little bit about Aquila. So Aquila is this airplane that is made out of carbon monoxide. The frame is made out of carbon monoxide monocoque, and it really is basically like a wing of a plane without the body. And the surface of it is covered with solar panels that are used to power the plane. And the rest of it is designed to be aerodynamic enough so that it's super optimized to minimize air drag. So this is a picture of Aquila next to Boeing 737. It has the same width of a 737, but again, not the body. And because the carbon monoxide the material is so light, the weight of this airplane is equivalent to a third of a sedan, a normal car. So it's super light, and it runs off of the power of 3 blow hair dryers. So the amount of power required to run this is very little. And I think we have a video actually to see about Aquila. Let's see if this works.
GCS flight line?
Flight line, GCS go.
We're going to put power on now, okay?
Copied.
To fly on solar power takes very, very low mass. If you get rid of everything else, what's left is the thing you really need. a wing, and propulsion.
All together!
But until it's actually airborne, it's hard to tell that all of it will work.
The sun is just coming up. We can see the daylight coming over the mountains now. Can you give me a wind check near the launch position?
Gusting 5 knots.
7 knots off the nose right now.
GCS flight line, please be advised the winds are shifting. This is it, we have to go.
So remove the safety straps and go fly.
Copy, we are ready for launch.
Good luck. All stations launching in 3, 2, 1.
Come on.
We're moving. Commands are coming up. 30%, 40, 50.
Please.
Full throttle.
This thing has the wingspan of an airliner and is going to fly on roughly the power of 3 blow dryers.
500 across the board. There's airspeed.
Give lift off.
Lift off detected. And we're climbing.
Yes! What did we get? It is flying!
Look at it. It's hovering there.
That's what it's designed to do, though, isn't it?
Yeah! Beautiful.
ACS aircraft looks stable. Station test point 1 complete. Starting test point 2. Climb out 500 feet above ground level.
Or through minimum altitude.
We're getting excellent autopilot performance. It's behaving exactly as modeled.
About time to start that left. Yeah, coming up. Right.
Copy, 1 moment.
Working it.
Things are looking great.
The airplane's performing beautifully. We're doing great. Press on. Right hand turn to 250.
So this is Aquila, and it's pretty cool. And this thing is supposed to fly at 90,000 feet, which is about 3 times the altitude of commercial airplanes. And the reason is that the air there is so thin that it wouldn't take a lot of power to sustain this thing floating so high. You saw the goal is to have this floating for 3 months straight. So it's quite a bit of time, and that would just be running off the solar energy. Actually, something that was a challenge at the time when they did the first test flight was landing it, because I don't know if you noticed, it doesn't have landing gears. So it doesn't have any, the wheels or any of the struts that an airplane would need to land in, because those would be too heavy. And so one cool thing that they did in the next test flight, you can't see it as well, but they managed to figure out a way to land this. Here you can see if this works. Because the first flight, it got destroyed in landing. But here, it actually lands pretty gracefully. So they basically created a sand bed for it to just come at the right speed and using the wind, so going into headwind, so that it slows itself down just the right amount to land. And they installed some motors that would act as brakes. So you can see this is stuff that is a lot of work in progress and experimenting, and it still has a long way to go. One of the challenges with this stuff is now this thing is going to be moving around in space. How does it actually communicate the signal between each other? These planes would create kind of an umbrella and then beam internet down over a region. So they have to communicate between themselves and down to devices on the ground. So they use laser technology, or the millimeter waves to do this communication. And so, it's quite challenging to think about getting something to point at a moving plane. Think about the shitty Wi-Fi that you've ever used in a plane when you're flying and buying those 20 euro Wi-Fi plan that doesn't actually work. And so the technology that this team has been researching is using some sort of tracking that would be able to keep track of the plane over a distance that is about 13 kilometers. So it's pretty cool to think about the amount of bandwidth that they've been able to achieve. So the first achievement of this was that they were able to output 36 gigabyte per second over a 13 kilometer range, which is pretty amazing. And they tested this with a Cessna plane. I don't know if you guys have seen, these are the little planes with rotors. They're basically little planes with just carry 2 people. And so they put a device on it and then did a test with it, and were able to achieve a 16 gigabit signal, or 16 gigabit per second signal on this plane, flying 7 kilometers away in the air, and the device at the ground beaming internet to it. In fact, they more than doubled the bandwidth on this. Now they can achieve 40 gigabit per second with the Cessna. And they can achieve up to 80 gigabit per second using optical crosslink technology, which I have no idea what it means. I tried to understand it, but couldn't make sense of it. But to give you a sense of what these numbers mean, 80 gigabit per second means somebody downloading 4,000 high-definition videos or streaming 4,000 high-definition movies at once. This is the amount of bandwidth that this 80 gigabits per second can support. So it's a lot of power, and we're thinking of powering entire regions with it. This amount of signal would be pretty sufficient. Okay, so let's talk quickly about the relevance problem and how some of the ways that we've been researching this and addressing it. So when we think of some regions or some countries, like in Ghana, only or more than 65% of the population is actually not aware of the internet or what usefulness it brings to them. In South Africa, the number is at 50%. So these are pretty big numbers. When you have more than half of the country not knowing what the internet is or how to use it, it's a problem. And this is what Free Basics comes in, which I'll talk about in a second. Affordability is another thing, and one cool experiment they did with this is that if we're able to squeeze the internet to make it only 500 megabytes, so the entire internet is just 500 megabytes, then or like 500 megabytes worth of data per month to use the internet, then 34% of the population can afford this. But if we can bring that down to 250 megabyte, then we can allow 50% of the population to afford the internet. And if the internet can fit into 100 megabyte a month, then, 80% of the population can afford it. And of course, these numbers are tiny. Like 100 megabytes is nowadays a few YouTube videos, right? So this is not a lot of data nowadays. But to think about improvements we can make on two fronts, if we can compress the data in new ways or innovative ways such that we're sending less data on the wire so that people are paying less, and if we can make simply data plans cheaper for people. So this is where Free Basics comes into play. We launched this program called Free Basics in now I think more than 50 countries. And the idea of this program is that people have access to free internet through their operator. So here, who's a famous operator? MTA? LMT, yeah. So they would be basically somebody that provides you internet for free. So you don't buy a data plan, you just keep your regular voice plan, and then you can access this service called Free Basics, where you would be able to browse these free basic services. So in this screenshot here, you see some of the basic services that a user would have access to through the operator's network. And they can use these services and interact with them without paying for any of the data they incur. And these services are supposed to be ones that use low bandwidth, and they're meant to be tailored for people who are new to the internet. So it addresses the problem of people never using the internet, never thinking they needed it, and saying, why should I pay for this? And now suddenly there's an app on their phone that they can use that doesn't cost them any money, that gives them exposure to the internet so they can get a sense of how this thing can help them. And oftentimes these services are tailored for people who come from lower economic status, people who live in rural communities, things that address women's issues, health, anything with education, finding jobs, and these would be the needs that people from these communities would have, and that could be addressed through these services. So actually, one example of a service that I feel quite passionate about is one that was called RefUnite. So I'm originally from Iraq, and RefUnite was one of the services on FreeBasics. So FreeBasics was a program that launched in Iraq. And in Iraq there was a lot of problems with refugees and displacement. And these guys launched a platform for people to look for each other through the service. So people were basically being displaced and families were being split up and separated. So you can go on this website and sign up. If you have somebody that you're looking for, you can post about them and say, I'm looking for this person. Or if you're somebody that you want to say, hey, I was separated from my family, this is me. If my family signs up for this thing, then they can find them. So through this work, at the time, this was a couple of years ago, they were able to connect more than 10,000 people through the service. And you can imagine refugees are a pretty important population to address in this, because they would probably be ones where they wouldn't have the ability to afford a fully fledged data plan. So quickly, let's talk about how FreeBasics work from a technical perspective. It basically is a proxy. So what we do is we work with the operators and we say, hey, here's a bunch of IP addresses that we want you to whitelist. When we say whitelist means, or zero rate. Zero rating IP addresses means we ask the operator to not charge people for the data they incur when they hit these IP addresses. So when you go to your browser, you type in google.com, your browser or your phone will figure out what is the IP address of Google, and then it will hit that IP address and it will talk to Google, and then it'll serve you the content from Google. So what we do is we say these IP addresses, don't charge people for them. And then when you try to go to one of these sites like RefUnite through FreeBasics, what happens is that we mangle the URL, we rewrite the URL such that it points to this FreeBasics proxy, and then the original URL is served with the payload. And then in the FreeBasics proxy, we fetch the content from RefUnite or whatever is the service that you're trying to use. Then we bring it to the proxy and then send it back to the user. So the proxy acts in the middle as a place that is zero rated. All the data that goes between the proxy and the user is free, and then the rest of the internet comes through the proxy. So this is how we ensure that this program is not abused and people are not downloading movies on it or using it to abuse the program. So very very basic web proxy, and of course it supports encryption, which was a very important thing to support. People are talking about safety on the internet and privacy. This was something that we needed to implement. So it actually has end-to-end encryption along the way. Okay, and last project or last program that I'll talk about here today quickly is Express Wi-Fi. Is this program that offers fast and affordable internet through prepaid Wi-Fi subscriptions. So the Express Wi-Fi ecosystem involves these 4 stakeholders. So we have Facebook, and Facebook is basically building the software and the business model of Express Wi-Fi. And then we partner with operators in countries. So we launched Express Wi-Fi in India, in Indonesia, and a few countries in Africa. And the idea is that we work with the operator to bring internet signal to a community where the connection has been pretty bad. So usually it would be 2G connection in the area. And then we work with them to install a radio station or a tower somewhere there to bring LTE signal there. And then we work with local entrepreneurs. So these would be people who run a little shop here or there. And then we install Wi-Fi radios on the top of their house or the top of their shop. And then that acts as a hotspot for that community. And this entrepreneur would be selling data or Wi-Fi subscription to the people there. And this would act as a replacement for the 2G signal that was serving this community before and not being sufficient. And then obviously there's the 4th stakeholder in this is the user who's getting internet that's cheaper than the operator's original plan, but also faster. So we've been experimenting with this model for about 3 years now in Asia and Africa, and we're continuing to grow this program through more countries. So quickly, I'll end on this slide. Through these efforts, we've connected about 100 million people. We've worked with more than 1,000 global services that are provided through FreeBasics. and deployed solutions in more than 60 countries with more than 80 operators. And by operators, I mean telecom operators in these regions. So 100 million people is a lot of people, but it's actually not that many when we think of the number of people that remain unconnected. So this work is, making a small dent in the connectivity problem. So we still have a long way to go, but we're able to see the benefits of these efforts and some of these programs paying off and making a difference. So I'll end here. Thank you all for joining. I can take some questions, I think, or.
For questions.
Thanks. Finally, I get the mic. All of what you say seems just overwhelmingly altruistic. What is the business behind all of this? And are you expecting that Africans and Chinese are going to kind of pay for all of that?
Well, so I kind of said this at the beginning, that when Facebook started thinking of, okay, we have 1 billion users or however many, then how do we get the rest of the people? And the rest of the people are not going to be on Facebook if they're not on the internet. So the way this ends up working out for Facebook is that the idea is that hopefully people get on the internet more, hopefully Facebook gets more users. So it's one of those, again, big bet projects where the company is kind of hitting a ceiling to their growth, because pretty much everybody on the internet is now on Facebook. And now we're thinking, how do we get the next of the rest of the world? So it's both. It serves the business and it serves the people. And if you actually hear Mark talk about this is one of the projects that he would talk about publicly, and this is kind of his vision for generally Facebook as a company. He thinks that it's a company that is acting as a business and making money and growing. But the idea is that he wants the business to be something that continues to be good for the people, and this is one of the projects that I think is good for the people. Probably, in a less controversial way than some of the other things that Facebook does.
So, in the case of Free Basics, how do you get the operators to cooperate with you to give free access to whitelist your IPs? Do you have do you pay them, or what's the deal there?
Yeah, so we don't pay the operator. The incentive for them is that the business model behind Free Basics is that, like I said, some people are not on the internet because of an awareness problem, not because of an affordability problem. So if we can get these people aware of the internet and its benefits and how they can use the internet to serve their needs, then hopefully these people will convert to be users that now they want to watch YouTube videos and download movies or do other things that they would need to get a data plan for and use the internet for. So in that sense, they become paying users, and the idea of the business model is that the operator recovers the cost through that. It's just like any time an operator says, here's a free SIM card or here's a free month of subscription. Why are they doing this? Because they're hoping that they recover the costs down the road, and it's a similar model that you see it as an entry point where you can get more users through it.
And I guess probably there's a problem with the internet bandwidth there as well. So do you have any type of filtering of the content to make the payload smaller actually for the end user on your proxy servers? Yeah.
So Free Basics has restrictions on content types, so it doesn't serve videos, it doesn't support file downloads. The idea of that's why it's called Free Basic services, is that these services are mostly text and images, so they're not heavy in bandwidth where you would need a lot of data. So the operator is not, basically giving out all this free bandwidth and not getting anything. So it has to be a thing that can somehow end up, being sustainable. Other questions?
Hello.
Hey.
The Aquila thing is quite exciting for me.
Yeah.
And the first question, why it's so huge?
What's that, sorry?
Why it's so huge?
The plane. Why is it so
plane
big?
is so it's quite big.
Right. Yeah. So actually, the plane tries to create a lot of surface area for solar to capture solar energy. right? So the wing is basically a massive solar panel. And so they had to do some research on finding the right optimization so that it's big enough to capture enough energy, but not so big that it's too heavy to fly. So they found this to be the optimal size with what we have as current technology for solar panels.
Okay, and how many of those things are at the moment up in the air?
So they're actually, so Aquila, like I said, is kind of one of those futuristic projects that there's a lot of research and experimentation with it, and it may end up looking very different when it's implemented than it does now. So right now it's in the phase of like getting these things to actually work before we haven't gotten to the point where they're in the air and they're serving the internet. So a lot of this stuff that I mentioned with the planes connecting, and these are kind of theoretical models that have been developed, and we haven't gotten to the point where we can have it up in the air for 90 days to be able to deploy it.
90 days.
The goal is 90 days, 3 months. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I believe it comes down and they replace some of the parts, put new panels, and maybe recharge it and then send it up. So it wouldn't just be thrown in the garbage after 90 days. That would be quite a lot of money to lose. That's why the landing was a big problem, because if it crashes every time it lands, then that's not a sustainable way to run this program, right? So they had to really figure out getting it to land smoothly. Yes.
I just want to comment that actually Aquila project is cancelled like 2 hours ago. I just read on the news.
Yeah. So yes. So it's the thing that is changing in the Aquila project is that Facebook will not be building the plane itself. They're going to be building the underlying technology of batteries and the lasers and the communication. And they're partnering with a company that actually specializes in the airplane and building airplanes to do this. And I assume the rationale is that we don't build planes. That's not the business we're in, and we've done enough work getting this research and these projects off the ground. Then we're partnering with people that specialize in this, and we're continuing to research in areas that we have the strength in. More, it's the hardware and the software that we can develop, as opposed to plane engines and solar panels.
Any last questions?
Any other tough questions?
Yeah, this was a good one, like 2 hours ago.
I know.
Good thing you were up to date.
I know, I actually saw that. I just looked at this before I got on this. I was like, oh man, somebody's gonna ask me this question.
Of course they did. Of course they did.
Yeah, you guys are keeping me honest. This is good, I like it.
Yeah, nice. Wait,
right.
I will bring this.
One last question.
It's maybe also a tough one, but I'm sure you get this a lot as well. But how does the, SpaceX has announced that they are going to develop these low orbit satellites that are going to provide the high-speed internet. Yeah. So I'm wondering, how does that compare to what you guys are doing, or what Facebook is doing in the area, and are we going to see some sort of not the Cold War, but kind of competition in that area?
Oh, so you're saying SpaceX is launching their own thing?
Yeah, as far as.
Okay, I haven't heard about this. I know that we partnered with SpaceX 2 years ago to launch a satellite, and that didn't go very well. And so that was a point where we pivoted and we focused more on the lower to the ground technologies. But I don't know that SpaceX is doing their own thing.
Yeah, I think it's way down the road at some point.
Yeah,
and I that they're developing the satellites.
Right, and I think I think this is actually pretty cool that there's these companies that are. Google is doing their Loon project, right? And I think that's also a cool thing. And there's these companies that are taking a totally different approach to solve the connectivity problem, and I think that's great because Facebook is saying let's do drones and lasers and all these things, and then SpaceX is saying let's do satellites, and Google is saying let's do balloons, and then who knows? We don't know which one of them is going to work. Maybe they all will, or maybe none of them, or maybe the balloons will work. So I think that's really cool that there's these different big companies that can afford to take these big bets and invest in projects that may or may not work, and then hopefully one of them does, or maybe all of them will. And so the way I see this is this is pretty exciting that people are exploring this space.
One last question.
Yes, as a comment, with space stuff and satellites, the latency is a problem for data communications.
Yeah,
I have tried. I have worked with that, and I know.
Yeah.
That's a physics only.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you probably should be talking about this better than I am.
All right, I think we're done with the questions like in this format, and we can move into having questions around some food and some beer. Yes, exactly. It's about time. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Guys.